Shaheen? Yeah. Yes.
Are you hiding?
Okay, so this session is going to be chaired by Paul Goodwin. So Paul is a curator, researcher, and urban theorist based in London. His research and curatorial interests span the fields of transnational art, urbanism, and curatorial practice with a focus on African diaspora art and visual cultures. He is co-lead investigator for Worlding Public Cultures, the Arts and Social Innovation an international research project funded by the Transatlantic Platform for Social and Human Sciences. Paul Goodwin is also Professor and Chair of Contemporary Art and Urbanism and Director of the Research Centre for Transnational Art, Identity and Nation at the University of the Arts, London. It's great to have you here, Paul. Yeah. And in conversation we have Keith Piper in the green. He's artist, curator, researcher, and academic, and his creative practice responds to specific issues, historical relationships, and geographical sites. In the early 1980s, Keith Piper was a founder member of the Black Art Group, and during this period, he established a research-driven approach to art practice, prioritizing thematic exploration over an attachment to any particular media. His work has ranged from painting, through photography and installation, to a use of digital media, video, and computer-based interactivity. He has exhibited work nationally and internationally with selected solo exhibitions, including Jet Black Futures at New Art Gallery, Warsaw in 2022. Body Politics work from 1982 to 2007 here at the Wolverhampton Art Gallery in 2019. Jet Black 2019 Futures 1 at Beaconsfield Gallery Vauxhall in 2017. Unearthing the Banker's Bones at New Art Exchange Nottingham in 2017. And Blue Coat Gallery Liverpool between August 2016 and January 2017. Recent group exhibitions include Forecast Form, Art in the Caribbean Diaspora, 1990s, in Chicago, 2022 to April 2023. Life Between Islands, Caribbean British Art, 1950s, now at Tate Britain in December 2021 to April 2022. And Keith Piper currently teaches fine art at Middlesex University. Welcome, Keith. And next to Keith, we have Dr. Alice Correia is a curator and art historian. She recently co-curated the major exhibition, A Tall Order, at Rochdale Art Gallery in the 1980s at Touchstones, Rochdale, between February to May 2023. Her edited anthology, What is Black Art? Writing on Artists of African, Asian, and Caribbean Heritage in Britain, 1981 to 1989, was published by Penguin in 2022. And her articles on Black and South Asian British artists have appeared in Art History, British Art Studies, and Journal of Contemporary African Art. She is Chair of Trustees of Third Text and co-chair of the British Art Network's Black British Art Research Group. She is currently a research fellow at the Decolonising Arts Institute, University of the Arts, London. And to the other side of Keith, we have Shaheen Merali, who is a curator, critic, and artist of Asian heritage. Merali began his artistic practice in the 1980s, committing to social, political, and personal narratives. He is currently a PhD candidate at Coventry University. Merali was the curator of the inaugural Ugandan Pavilion, Radiance They Dream in Time 2022 for the 59th Venice Biennale. The pavilion was presented with a Golden Lion Special Mention Award. He was the co-curator for Berlin Heist, or The Enduring Fascination of Walled Cities, 4th Meditations Biennial 2014, and co-curator of the 6th Gwangju Biennial in Korea 2006. Murali was head of Department of Exhibition, Film and New Media at Haus der Kulturen der Welt, Berlin, between 2003 to 2008, and he curated the Black Atlantic and Reimagining Asia, 1,000 Years of Separation. Thank you, Shaheen. And lastly, but not least, we have Candice Nembhard, also known as OK Candice, who is a writer, artist curator, archivist and musician between Birmingham and Berlin. They are a Jerwood Arts Curatorial Fellow and Obsidian Foundation Fellow. Their practice is concerned with uses of text, methodologies of grief through sound and collective performance, alongside the production, preservation and maintenance of Black audio, visual archives and libraries. OK Candice is a co-founding member of the Collective Poet and Prophetess and co-director of the non-profit Brethren CIC. In 2019, they founded All Fruits Ripe, an independent series of queer, Black, global majority filmmakers. Forthcoming is Portals, a digital archive documenting British West Indian customs in the domestic. Today, they maintain the digital project OK Candice Archive, host the experimental broadcast Bedtime Stories on Kashmir Radio, and the audio research series Must Be the Music on Refuge Worldwide. Thank you all for being here, and I'm going to hand over to Paul.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and thank you both to Sylvia and Ian for organising this wonderful symposium. This morning's session was incredible. I've been waxing lyrical about it, and I really think it's a great way to start the conversations. As Keith said, in this panel we're going to widen the scope a little bit to look at the context, but I'm sure the artworks are always present and will creep back in certain forms. As Sylvia's outlined, we've got an amazing panel of extremely distinguished and knowledgeable guests. So what we're going to, I think, do is we will kind of start the conversation with each panelist giving a very brief reaction to the film in any way they would like to choose, and then we'll have a brief conversation among us on the stage. And then open it out to you to bring the audience in and have a conversation. So if that's okay with everyone, we'll do it that way. Were you okay with the order? So, Alice, would you like to begin?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Sylvia and Ian, for the invitation to be here. It's a really wonderful day. I've got a couple of slides, if that's okay. We'll go to the first one. What I took away from the conversations that we had about what we might want to talk about in this panel, and which Keith's film really articulated, is the question, what is Black art, and the ways that that question circulated within the decade and reverberated and rippled. And I've just extracted a brief line. What is Black art? Who are Black artists? What should be their role? And this is a review of the Creation for Liberation exhibition held in Brixton in 1983, which included works by Tam Joseph and Shaheen. And so that was kind of my starting point, the idea that this exhibition held within its space works by artists from very different cultural, ethnic backgrounds, and that there was an openness within that space to query what is Black art, who are Black artists, and what should their role be. So, and then sort of, I was thinking about this notion of who is a Black artist, and I wanted to identify the photographer Mumtaz Karamji, who is of South Asian heritage but worked in solidarity with Black photographers groups, women's groups. Lubaina Hamid included her in exhibitions of Black women as art, at Battersea Art Centre, but she also, in tandem with that, worked with groups of South Asian women in the Mukti Collective and produced a journal. So that this idea of blackness wasn't fixed, and it wasn't you had to pick a side, but that things were fluid, and depending on the context, you negotiated those identities. And Mumtaz's text that was published in Mukti, Black and Asian Definitions and Redefinitions, is a really interesting article where she identifies herself first and foremost as a black woman artist, but who is also a lesbian, who is also South Asian, who is also raised in Tanzania. And so these overlapping intersections of her identity sort of built towards what she was doing in her artistic practice. And then I wanted to draw attention also to the fact that in 1988, Eddie Chambers' exhibition Black Art Plotting the Course was staged here at Wolverhampton. And as part of the public programme for that exhibition, there was a series of events called What is Black Art? So even by 1988, in an exhibition context called Black Art Plotting the Course, there is a question, what is black art? And in an extended conversation that's published in the journal Third Text, Eddie Chambers and Rashida Reen talk about the definitions of black art, what it is. And for Irene, it was work that was didactic, that was ideologically driven, that had a political message, that was overt in its anti-racist stance. But by 88, Eddie's definition had broadened so that it could include works by Gurminder Sakand, whose painting of a woman riding an elephant could be included within that definition. So I want to sort of leave it there. I think that's...
Are we on? Cool. I have a very quiet voice, so if it starts to dip out, just let me know, please. I guess one of the things that I wanted to initially respond to in regards to this film is actually like the presentation and preservation of material. As somebody that is an archivist and is an avid learner, a researcher when it comes to archival materials as it relates to black people in this country. One of the things that I was really interested in is the lineage of these materials. So my first interaction or my first encounter with the Black Art Group was when I was about 14. I'm an internet child, so I spent a lot of time on the internet, and there's an online blogging platform called Tumblr. And I remember the first instance in which I came across the Black Art Group was the Black Art Undone exhibition poster on Tumblr when I was about 14 years old. And that was sort of my first foray into looking at not only the history of black artists, black art, but also in the context of the Midlands, which is where I'm from Birmingham. And so that was a huge transformatory step for me in my journey into looking into art, into artist materials, art laborers, art workers. And so to trace that lineage through the digital space and then come into contact with these materials in the physical space has made a huge impact on me in my journey as an artist, as a curator, and as an archivist as well. And I think one of the things that I would encourage or bring out in today's conversation, or just to highlight in terms of my own contribution, is how do we become the auditors and the gatekeepers of the material that we produce? How do we keep these materials within not only our grasp, but within our care? And how do we make sure that we preserve these materials in a way that someone like myself or someone younger than me can also access this material in a way that they would naturally access information as they do today. So I'm grateful for the internet for giving me my first step into accessing Keith Piper's work, the Black Art Group in general. That step, I would say, by a leap, has allowed me to work with the likes of Marlene, likes of Vanley Burke as a curator, for which I'm eternally grateful. So my thinking or my approach to this is looking at the ways in which ephemera and materials are made, preserved, kept, shared, and what are the first instances or spaces that we meet this material. So I mentioned briefly in the introduction, I'm working on building an archive called Portals, which is based on a show that I curated at Eastside Projects in 2021. Marlene was one of the artists alongside Vanley Burke, an artist by the name of Jade Foster, who's originally from Nottingham, they're in London now, and Rihanna Jade Parker, who's an artist and critic. And that show was looking at the preservation of how do we respond to materials in the domestic space and how do we view the domestic space as its own archive. And that came off the back of the passing of my mother and digging into her materials and images and photos and ephemera around her, which sort of kick-started my thinking. So a lot of the work that I do is sourced in some kind of text as a medium, text as an idea, and how we preserve that text in whatever ways that we can in means that are available to us now, and thinking forward to the future about how we can preserve this material so that it can be accessed by generations ahead of us. So that's my sort of initial response and approach to this film.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Candice. Shaheen?
Thank you very much to the organizers, Sylvia, Ian. You've been very, very generous with what you've done in the exhibition is profound, moving, and it really stays the course. I was very happy to visit it and see within it works which I hadn't seen for a very long time, and works which should be permanently displayed because of the scale and depth of what they attest to. And the reason I say that is because, in a sense, what Keith does in this film was part of a greater body of response to what was going on in Britain. We were all making some form of personal reflection. We were all making and being assertive within the limited area that we could be assertive through. Being a practitioner in the 1980s, being a student coming out in the 1980s was incredibly, incredibly difficult. There wasn't a space through which our political ideas, our artistic practices, which were based on political notions, could be found easily. What we did find, and that was something which was really important, was the notion of a new common. And what I mean by the new common is that we were able to eat from each other's dishes. We were able to shop in each other's places. We were able to worship together. And we were able to coexhibit. Now this was difficult in the beginning. Some of us came to this country not speaking English. Some of us came to this country speaking English very well. So the concept of being a new kind within the new common in itself was a very difficult area to build upon. It wasn't a given, nor was it a concept that we always grew up with. We'd always grown up with historically othering other people, where we came from because we were colonized, in a sense, in our ways and in our countries, even through independence. What I think happened was that we, working through the arts, provided us a perspective within which diversity had a place, the way we saw diversity, not how the council saw diversity. The diversity of having to build on very little, to build within family structures which didn't necessarily want us to do what we were about to do. There wasn't a community waiting out there to see what we were going to come up with. So to build that from a very complex, long history, a very violent, long history, and coming from places where extraction was the norm. There was nowhere else we could go apart from building it up further. What I think happened in the 1980s, and Keith is a key person, is that there was an interweaving of materials, ideas. And I mean by interweaving is not only in terms of snippets that could be used for video and film and news footage, but people started to mine the archive differently through ethnography, through local mythology, and maybe even through bringing what was then called the Third World and what we call the Southern World and its folklore towards Britain. And I think this, in a sense, as Ghislaine and I were talking earlier on, was the embodied experience through which we brought a certain knowledge which was not present within Britain. And in that sense, what happens here in this film is a vast juxtaposition, a compact collage. It is structured around geopolitical frontiers, about regions and nationalisms. It has both spiritual and personal dimensions which intersect. And at that time, you also have to remember that what was happening in Britain was incredibly spiritual in a way. Black culture was highly, highly embodied by the presence of the music that they listened to, the type of food and diets which they then addressed themselves towards. There were great changes at foot. So these personal dimensions and experimental approaches are to be found in the works of many of those artists at this point, and Keith being one of those people who enjoys restructuring is what happens, in a sense, in this work. And I'm going to leave it at that at this point.
So thank you all for your really considered and generous responses. Just to sort of sum up a little bit, which is quite difficult because quite a lot of ideas were circulated. So there was discussions around following Keith's work. Sorry. Keith, I went straight into that. But what I was going to say is, do you want to add to what your contextualization earlier?
There were a few questions. Which came up. And some really interesting reflections. I felt, especially on kind of all of the contributions. I thought they were all really, really fascinating in terms of what they explored. I just wanted to pick up on the question which you raised in the what is black art, and I don't want to go into that because one of the things which
we're going to go into that. We're going to go into that.
No, because it becomes such a quagmire in terms of different uses of terminology, etc., etc. And within that moment in the first part of the 1980s, I think it really bogged us down, just trying to kind of come up with a definition, in a sense. And this morning, the thing which was most interesting was it was obvious, because, it is what are artists making? And that is what defines the thing. You don't define it from above. You define it through the activities and the interests and the processes which artists are engaging with. I think within the question, though, there is a much stickier question, which is to do with how the term black was being used in different moments in the 1980s. Now, it's interesting. Was anybody here in the first, when we had the introduction, the first conversation with this show? Yeah, because then when we looked at the term, at the poster Black Art and Done, I pointed out that according to Rashid Areen, the great, one of our greatest minds, that was actually the first time that the term black art had been used in the United Kingdom in the context of an event or whatever. And I gave people homework. I actually said at the time, I'm looking out, I can see some of our most brilliant researchers, please go away and research this. Did anybody do that? It's really good. It was Rashid, yes, yeah. And so in a sense, and the important thing about that, and this comes up when you listen to the audio tape from the 1982 convention, because Rashid comes from a very specific edition of British radicalism coming out of the 1970s. Him, Sivanande, Farooq, all those guys who were deeply involved in radical black politics, in the kind of black Atom Panthers, etc., in this country. And within this country, the definition of and black was very much a political definition which embraced, people from the Caribbean, from Asia, from Africa, who would come together to act politically against racism in this country. Then the term black, which we were sometimes looking at, was a term which we were inheriting from the United States. I think that's one of the interesting things about when we use the term black art here. A lot of us had been reading stuff coming from the United States, like Ron Karenga's book, Black Poets and Prophets, The Black Aesthetic, those books. These were books coming from American cultural nationalists, basically. And they had a very specific sense of blackness as being of African descent. So you already had that kind of competing definitions of blackness. And then you had, obviously, the kind of rich cultural and political scene, which was coming from Jamaica, embodied in music and politics, which also, was kind of informing us through the 1970s. So these strands came together to make a real point of contest around what do you mean by black? And that became quite a kind of sticky issue. I mean, in terms of the Black Art Gallery in Finsbury Park, who, because it was founded by what was essentially a group of kind of cultural nationalists, Obala, they saw blackness as very much of African descent. And so there were some really difficult things where, young radical Asian artists were going into Obala and saying, will you show my work? I said, no, you're not of African, and it was that really, yes, was that happening? Yes, yeah, because this man here, I first met this man, the man had dreadlocks right down to the back of his thing. As an artist, making fantastic work. Also born in Tanzania. So you were African, and you had that experience with black art. However, then, because of a younger generation of artists, then, pointed it out that to this particular position was unworkable. And then you had Marlene and others who then took over the Black Art Gallery and then made it into this space which showed a whole range of artists were very much based on what they were making. And in a sense, that was the position, that was the richness of that position. Anyway, I don't want to go too much into that, but I'm just fascinated in terms of the way that those terms had evolved.
I want to add a tiny detail here. When Rashid Areen set up his first press, it was called Kala Books. Kala, yeah. Kala in Urdu means black. And that preceded in 1979, as far as I know. But what I think is important here, if we're going to really talk about this, is that I think what's really important is what the political black art movement did was considerable analysis of what the British modernity couldn't do for its immigrant population. And what I mean by that is that we were facing familiar brutality throughout the communities. Brutality on the street. I lived very close to Paddington. If you went to Paddington police station, you hardly ever came out alive, if not black and blue. It was known that this is what would happen to anybody who was non-white. And we were called non-white at that point, if you remember, non-European.
Amongst things.
Amongst the various other things, yeah. But what I think happened at that time is that we debated that high tourism, which led the sort of assailment of black culture and immigrant culture. Conservative British politicians created a right-wing scenario through which violence was part and parcel of the way we lived with our lives. We never knew if we would return back the way we came through, you know. And I think methodologies which were involved in making the work that a lot of artists did was to try to, in a sense, make sure who we were. In a sense, black British took a long time to come to terms with in Britain. That early part of the 1980s, people didn't believe themselves to be British. That notion of British was a long time in coming. You don't think so?
No. It's very true. And when did Paul Gilroy do There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack?
87.
87, because that was really the book which really began to crystallise those sorts of ideas. That you could have, and when Sonia did her English Rose work. When was that piece? 86, yeah. So it was in that moment.
Yeah. The
that
early
we
80s.
really, yes. Well, it's the later 80s, isn't it? It's the second half of the 80s.
83, I think, around that, when it became a bit more prevalent.
Is it? Well, what do people think who were there? Who were in that? Shaheen is kind of pitching it as slightly earlier. I'm saying, Paul Gilroy's book, Ain't No Black in the Union Jack, that kind of, that was the moment when really these arguments were really crystallised. Obviously, they had to have been around before that for Paul to have put them in such a articulate form. Yeah, but you're saying 83. I'm not sure 83 is a bit early. 87 for that, yes. Yeah. And Sonia's work, when was Sonia's work? 86. 86, yeah.
I also think that
Go on. The first who?
The first National Black Women's Conference.
Oh, right, okay. So,
Black History Month.
yes, so in that time, you were getting all of these new configurations which were emerging. It was very, yes.
Thank you, Ajamu, for that intervention, because what it does is talk about some of the exclusions around the way that black art was defined and continues to be defined in some respects. And we kind of talked a bit about, or perhaps was an underlying sense in which Asian artists were perhaps initially excluded from the first kind of definitions of black art, and then it became radical black art and opened up, as Keith mentioned. But I didn't want to focus on that so much, right? What I wanted to do, if you don't mind, is just go back to Candice, because I think the questions that Candice raised really, for me, two things. One, I was thinking the same thing as I was looking at the show, looking at the materiality of the works, looking at how they were preserved, but thinking about how many works didn't make it, how many works were left under the bed, how many works were not taken, given the kind of museum quality care that these works were, right? So that, to your questions, I thought were really excellent at that. Also, I think your question, Candice, takes us back to the first session, which is about the artworks themselves. Because what we can end up is getting into a kind of nostalgia fest about the 80s and, I don't mean that.
I love nostalgia.
Because I've been involved in many of these, what is black art? We're going to go in circles, and I think I'd just like to take us out of that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, as well, let's not forget that the actual strapline of the conference, and I'll come to you in a second, okay? The strapline of the conference, of the First National Black Art Convention, mentions the form, function, and future. The form, right? But we kind of focused on the idea, was it black art? Claudette's intervention in that conference very much focused on form, right? And so, but somehow those questions of form, which we talked about this morning, kind of get lost. So I'm wondering how we can articulate the questions that Candice was raising. Because they also raised the question around care. How do we care for them? How do we make sure they're passed down, that they're shared for, preserved, and cared for? What are the lineage of materials? I thought it was a beautiful phrase. The lineage of these materials. The present, how do we preserve and present and preserve them? I mean, something, preservation, particularly museums. I don't think I've met a black conservator yet. I'm sure there are, but I've not met a black museum conservator. Have you? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do we kind of articulate these questions with our discussions around what is black art? Maybe, we can start to think about how they come together. So let me just hold that and get a response from you all about how perhaps you care for and preserve, what role you're doing in that. And then we'll come to your question and open it up to the audience. Is that okay? So do you want to just briefly sort of respond to that? I mean, Shaheen, you're an artist as well as a curator. You've been a museum director. That question of care and preservation that Candice raises, I mean, how, it's particularly in relation to works by black artists, which are very fragile, precarious, and there's a history of destruction of black art, right? Yeah. What kinds of ethical relations do we have to those kinds of practices?
I personally think it's a very important moment in British art history, which remains outside of British art history. And I think maybe it's good that it has maintained that space of ambivalence, because once it gets too confused with things which haven't been resolved within British art history itself, it can at least work through notions of cultural studies, media studies, where it operates in a way that gives a more collective use of the word and the collective use of the way that whole formations of ideas came through. It's also very difficult to talk about black art without always thinking about violence, because when I came to this country, it was really, really difficult to be here. And in a sense, that also was a situation of why the art was made, why the poetry was written, why the empire still remains central to the discourse, how we experience Britain. And I know that by looking at statements from all the artists who are present when they're written about their education, even in art education, they had all difficult times of being there. There wasn't a time when one felt one could go into a museum because you were not welcomed, nor was it anything to do with your background or your ideas. So there wasn't anything in the public domain. So when these small galleries turned up and the shebeens were there and the head shops were around, it became completely different. We could go to Finsbury Park and find the records you wanted. You could go on a Saturday night somewhere where you weren't going to be just told to go away. And I think all of that is part of the black art discourse. The reason why Linton Kwesi Johnson writes the way he writes is to maintain an immigrant's dialect, deliberately so that we maintain a sense of memory, history, and the place where we came from. So there's a liberation within that intellectual moment, which we need to celebrate, which was about not being assimilated fully. And credit to all of those people who were radically insoluble And I think that's important too.
It's a great phrase, radically insoluble. I love that. Candice, do you want to respond to your own question?
Sure. There's so many things, and I'll do my best to be succinct. I think one of the ways that we can care for these materials is through interrogation. I think I'm a big supporter of questioning why we make the work in the first place, for whom and by whom, and where do we want this work to exist, to be shared, to be consumed. And I think as someone I'm an artist and a curator, so I try to look at things as a unified practice. And I'm always curious when I come into a space, an artistic space or a space where art or art laborers are kind of taking over. I'm always curious about the why. Whenever I meet other curators with years of experience on me, why do you want to work with these set of artists now? What is the objective here? What is the aim here? So I'm always curious as to, after 30 plus years of being in an institution, an organization, why now are we going back to these specific decades within Britain's art history and plucking artists out? And that's not a comment on the artists themselves. For me, it's a commentary on the institution of how art is represented within this country, and for whom and who they're trying to appease and why. So I think interrogation is a big part of how we can begin to care for the works and examine the lens through which these works are being curated and then shared and consumed. I think another part of how we can care for work or care for the preservation of work is through intergenerational exchange. I'm a big proponent in learning from my elders and learning through my peers. I think one of the things that I found post the passing of my mother was just how much information she had laid out for me without me consciously thinking about it. And it's only when in retrospect or in the materials that she left behind. My mother worked for the NHS for the majority of her life. And towards the end of her life, she didn't get to complete it, but she was working towards a PhD in which her research was looking at how we can value and support the child's voice. How do we listen to the child's voice? She worked in childcare within the NHS. And I found that really fascinating how in her own research and understanding of how we care for people, the most prominent voice actually is the child, because it's so earnest and so honest and so open. It hasn't been debilitated by code switching or this sort of particular layers and codes within language which we as adults adopt when we go into certain spaces. And so I tried to extract from that a little bit, from her own research, into how can we learn from people younger than us? How can we learn from people older than us? And how do we make a space for those dialogues to interact? But not only to interact, but actually to kind of plant seeds for another conversation in a different kind of space beyond my remit. So interrogation, I think intergenerational exchange, and I think another way we care for the works is to keep making work. I think as you mentioned, I think sometimes there is an instance to look to the past, which I think kind of puts a block on artists that are still alive, artists that are still making work, that are still interrogating, that are still thinking, digesting. And I find it really frustrating as a younger curator, meeting older curators who say, yes, well, I think it puts a very particular framework on these works that doesn't allow a conversation to continue about the work and how these works continue to exist. They have been made in a certain time, yes, but these works continue to exist and be developed in dialogue or through food, through exchange. So for me, I think one of the most powerful things that we can do, and by we, I mean people interested in thought, dialogue, exchange, love, pain, whatever. I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to keep making work, because that in itself carries its own dialogue, which looks back, art, while the process might be individual, art isn't made in isolation, it's made in reference, it's made in context. So I think, yeah, interrogation, intergenerational exchange, and just to keep making work and allowing, making a space for people to make work, because it's trying times,
Love those, yeah. Now, Spot on, spot on. Care, interrogation in relation to black artists' work, absolutely. Alice, as an art historian and a scholar and a curator, how do you relate to that?
Thank you for that. As someone who has just curated a show on the 80s, what I think Derek Horton, my co-curator, and I were trying to do in the show A Tall Order, Rochdale Art Gallery in the 1980s, is really interrogate what happened in that space and the ways in which the curator, Jill Morgan, tried to create an open arena for debate. And she staged exhibitions by Keith and Donald and Claudette, amongst many others. And so in our exhibition, we tried to respond to that and reflect that exhibition program without siloing the work of Black and South Asian artists from their contemporaries and their peers. So we were able to put works by Donald and Keith in conversation with their white peers to sort of perhaps open up a cross-racial, cross-cultural dialogue to broaden out the conversation. And in a very practical way, one of the ways we were able to care or take care was that we were fortunate to get Arts Council funding to work with the estate of Donald Rodney and Ian Sargent and folks at Vivid Projects to create a digital film of one of Donald's slide works. And the intention of doing that was not just to show the work in our show. Embedded in that funding bid was so that the work would exist, the film would exist after our exhibition, so that it would have an afterlife, that it could be exhibited, that potentially the estate could edition it and it could go into public museums, so that Donald's work doesn't exist as a box of slides in a cupboard. So taking the time to investigate and working with colleagues to do that was really important for me on a personal level. But going back to what Candice was saying about archives, what was really interesting, has been really striking to me in working with archival material, is the fact that we work with what we've got, and so many conversations weren't recorded, so many conversations weren't published, and all of, sorry to go back to the question of what is black art, but if I may, I'd like to just read something that the incredible Maud Salter wrote in conversation with Mark Hayworth Booth, who was the curator of photography at the V&A. And she says, yes, this question of what is black art has certainly been one that's been around the houses and back again. I feel that the question of what is black art was thrown into the arena of the 1980s at the moment which black women were asserting their own identity and their own strengths. And to some degree, it was a very masculinist, navel-gazing practice of seeking to control that rather than to expand. I mean, as a black woman and as a black women artist, I obviously feel that the art I create is black art. However, I feel it's important for black women artists and artists in general to engage in dialogue with each other rather than to historicize. For instance, with black art in this country, a movement to ossify it, to put it in an archive, where surely we're only experiencing one small wave, building upon to hopefully a torrent of creativity.
Thank you for that beautiful quote from Maud. Keith, did you want to briefly respond, and then we'll go out to the audience?
Yeah. Yes, I just want to say some really quick things, and it's fantastic to kind of hear that, because one of the things which I think is most important in terms of this process of archiving, recording is the process of documentation. That we have to be constantly documenting the work which is made. I mean, often the work which is made is site-specific, is installation, etc. So it can't exist past the exhibition. And often, you know, the works are fragile, etc. So we have to do that work of a documentation, building up those archives. And I think in terms of what Maud was saying, the archive then, the kind of documentation, when it feeds back into the educational process, because that's the important thing, that these things exist, and then students, young artists, emerging artists can then see that stuff and learn. I mean, and that's where it then gets its kind of renewed energy from. The other point is the custodianship of the objects that are made often. And that also becomes really important, that the objects, the artworks that are made, sometimes fragile, sometimes, are placed in institutions and frameworks where they can be looked after. I think that is really important, and that is something which the publicly funded institutions, the art galleries, etc., really need to kind of take a lead on, because those are the people with the infrastructure, the expertise, etc., to do that. Massive, and that's a massive issue, especially with the digital work. I just wanted to say that. A very short story, however, because somebody said about art underneath the bed. And there's a really lovely example of an artwork which lived underneath a bed in the show, which is Donald Rodney's How the West Was Won, which spent many, many years underneath his bed until an institution, in this case the Tate, took it into their renovation, what's the term you use?
Conservation.
Their conservation spaces. And these spaces are amazing. I mean, they invited us in and we could look around. These spaces are bad. It's just incredible, the amount of kind of technology. And you asked about black conservators. You know, yes, we need that, but these people are scientists. It's fascinating. Well, they had a really interesting conversation because they said, did Donald have a cat? Yeah, he had black and white hair. That was Bill. Yes, because apparently this work was just like embedded into the paint was all this cat fur. And so in terms of like seeing, and then they could work exactly what kind of paint to use, what kind of base, what kind of ground.
And also the gun kind of as well. Do you remember the gun?
Yes,
well, finding
and also
the
the finding of the gun, which was a huge thing where they had to find the gun. Anyway, that's all I want to say in terms of that stuff.
Yeah.
Important.
Let's go to the audience.
Can I just say something to that, actually, very quickly? Paul,
Sorry,
I just wanted to say
Candice.
as well, in response to that very quickly, sorry to interrupt the question, I'll be very quick. It's that while I think it's very important that some of these works are properly taken care of within these institutions, I think it's also equally important that we can access these spaces, because oftentimes we either have to pay an exorbitant fee to access the archives or license the work, or you end up having to ring around 10 different curators, conservators to get access, and even then, the time that you have for the work is very minimal. So that's also just as important as them going in the space.
It's not a big argument for artist archives, for artists to actually keep their archives and make their archives accessible.
Yeah, I think so. That's part of the reason why I've made my own.
We need to go to the audience. We've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left, and we've got, I can see at least about 6 questions. So can we make them short? I know, but don't worry, I've got you. So you can start with you, and then we've got a few here. I'm not sure we'll get everyone in, but we'll try. Okay.
That's just not. I don't know, there was...
in Wolverhampton who can't afford to feed themselves. So I grew up in Wolverhampton born in 82. I didn't know about any of this, so this was news to me. So I went to the uni as well. I was educated in Wolverhampton schools, I was educated in Wolverhampton colleges. So what happened after the 80s was you had radicalism, where it was all just like pushed into the party. So that young black creators growing up like me, like grew up in a hostile environment during our education. We had we were taught European art history and that was all. I had to go to the library myself to look at African art, to look at Native American art, because we weren't taught that. We had in the School of Art, University, we had 4 white lecturers in the whole building. I'm talking, so like, what happened, like, where we were in such a hostile environment after that, and what are we going to do now to help us?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Let's take 3 or 4 questions and then answer them. So can we have short questions, please? Ajamu and then...
It's more of a statement. It's more of around statement. I think that there's a danger to always wait for the institute to try and come knocking.
Yeah.
So the question is then how do we do that? How do artists themselves learn to look after the preserve, after their own materials first and foremost? If then they don't come, what happens? And for me,
Agreed.
that conversation that I constantly come back against at the Black Queer Archive saying, what skills do we need to preserve?
Yes.
We can't be dependent on the institutions. Yeah. Okay. Question here.
Yeah, I think the subject that's come up today is obviously the destruction of what is black art, taking away from so much. I love the idea about archiving, but I think sometimes we just forget that we're sitting in the presence of greatness. And I think in terms of preserving things, I wonder if, because really, you're only a bit older than me, but it's amazing that you're still very nubile, because the 80s seemed ages ago.
We can address this later on.
I still have these amazing nubile cultured minds, and I wonder if you are, because with a lot of great European artists, one of the great things that we have of them is records of their letters and conversations with each other. And are you guys taking the time to archive that, to have private conversations, to write letters to each other, or it's emails now? I don't know what you're thinking of it, because, that's what we need records of your greatness and the conversations that you have as artists.
There are quite a few letters in the show as well, but great point about that. Thank you. Gentleman at the back, and then we'll have some responses very quickly.
Yeah.
Use the mic.
Oh, sorry.
You have captured my heart. You Candice. That question about curating, authorship, ownership, all the adverbs, whatever connected to it, is at the forefront of my mind. Because, like the artist up there, someone said we are almost the great, and I'm glad for that. But the great, to a certain extent, looks after itself. For me, I'm more interested in if the panel can address this question of what Keith roles, because that gives this young lady, same time that I was born and no longer living, educated in as well, the answers in terms of the underneath the bed. Because in the 80s, there were so many, myself and many others probably in this room, some of us are still going, so many have died.
Yes, absolutely.
What of their work? How we can, because that needs to come into the narrative. I sat here astounded
Okay.
at your record keeping.
Yeah.
When I looked at it, I thought, I've done that.
Yeah.
I've got that material, and I am determined. Last breath out my body, then you pass on. So how to the panel?
Okay, great. Let's have a few responses from the panel. Okay, to some of those points. Who wants to?
All right, I'll start that. I think the how is really important. The how can only be done if things are more interconnected. And that will increase the pace of our understanding of what happened and what's going on now and where the resources are. One part of how it was done in the 1980s was we had copy art, a photocopying set of machines which were available for people to use, especially artists. They also, and Rita Keegan was involved in it, Alan D'Souza were involved in it. And copy art in the 1980s allowed hundreds of artists to make photocopies, make catalogs, even produce designs for postcards. So when we are working together and things are under one roof at points, we can become that much more imaginative, that much more fearless, maybe even things which we should work with, like our wit, our political ideas, can be prioritized more. But once and now that we're living in such an individualized manner, sometimes we don't have those spaces to go to share and to understand. And I think that intensification of spaces like that creates the notion of what is now, what is happening, and what is available.
Okay.
I think you're absolutely right, because Carpi Art was an incredible space. However, now, and in terms of the how, we currently have in our pockets, the most powerful, well, not the most powerful, but really powerful tools in terms of documentation, in terms of, distribution, in terms of abilities to kind of have conversations and multiple conversations with multiple people internationally in real time. And so, in a sense, all of those things, all of the sharing of the archive, the looking at work, all of those things, I mean, we have tools now.
The challenge is those tools are immaterial.
Oh, I'm sorry?
Those tools are immaterial. How does that preserve the objects that are produced?
Well, that's the other question, isn't it? Because that was the other question about how is the digital archive stored. And obviously those of us who come from the 1990s in particular, there's a lot of digital work which was made at that time, which is inaccessible because the technology has moved on so quickly. I think it's less so now, because I think the technologies have, even though they're moving really rapidly, they are. Yeah. But, Mr. Photographer will then say, of course, our photographic print 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Who actually, yeah. I think ownership, questions of ownership are obviously huge. Yeah. Well, we can use it.
Any other responses?
We can use it.
I want to say that
and some of the other questions as well.
I'm going to try and answer both if that's possible. I'm not from Wolverhampton, and I'm not in that context. And I think I'm a little bit younger than you. That's an assumption. But what I will say is that I think everyone in this room is an archivist. Whenever you take a picture, whenever you send a text message, whenever you take whenever you capture something or hold on to something, a memory, a feeling, you're an archivist. And how you preserve that is up to you. In how sometimes you do it when you snap on your phone, when you put a photo album together, you're archiving. In terms of preservation, we can get to that, but if you've got a photo from 1960, 1970, you've preserved the photo because you still have it, you're still able to access it, you're still able to share it, and keep the stories that come with it. So you're already an archivist. Some people call it hoarding, I call it archiving. That's just me. That's just me. To answer to your point, I don't have a specific answer in terms of the context of Wolverhampton, but one of the things that I think has been an impact on artist making and how work is shared, preserved, and how young people, students, are actually able to engage with it is class. I think wealth has a big impact. Housing, I think, is probably the biggest impact. If you lived in a time where you have multiple families that would live in one home, my mum's side of the family is from up north, they're from Sheffield, Huddersfield, and my dad's from Aston. So I grew up between these two spaces. One of the things that I found really interesting is just how much material is kept within the home. And this is a home that my grandparents actually bought. So you've got generations of people that grew up in the home, the cabinet space, what's preserved in that space. What happens when people can't afford homes? They can't stay in one place. They're not static. They're renting. You have this dispersing of communities that would have grown up with each other don't talk to each other anymore because they've had to move, because they've been priced out or pushed out from neighborhoods and spaces that they would have grown up with. What happens is then that has a knock-on effect on the materials that you keep. If you've got to downsize and move to a smaller property, you can't keep all the materials that you kept or you would have had in your home. If you've had to move to a different country or a different city, you can only take with you the bare essentials, and what gets lost in that is stories, is energies, is feelings, and the material that would have been naturally produced within the home, kept within the home, preserved. And should an elder pass on, perhaps if the children were to take on the home, they might have kept some of those materials with them. And that's some of the things that I wanted to address in the show that we made at Eastside Projects. But I think poverty, class, and housing has such a huge impact on how we archive within the home, let alone in an institutional space. If you can't afford to live in your home, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to afford the materials to make your artwork, to put it in a gallery, to talk to a curator, to have that time. Everything boils down to the essentials. So it's not just about art in isolation, it's about art in context of how we live, how we're isolated, how we're pushed out, how we're overlooked, and then trying to find governance within that to sort of govern our own materials and our own art making. So I'm sorry that I'm not able to answer that specifically about your own experience within education, but I think class and racism intertwined has a huge impact on why we're not able to access our own materials, despite the fact that we're already making it in the home anyway.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Alice, last word to you. Are you okay? I think, unfortunately, I know there are many questions, Carol. Okay, just last, very, very quickly, please.
Yeah, I think it's just rather than that particular question really, because of the collecting cultures project that we had back in 2014 to 17, that sort of time. The whole point of that with the big funding bit, ATI funding, to be able to acquire work by people who were involved with the Black Art movement back in the 80s. I remember going to see Pete, and there were lots of work that really was not available because it had been automatic or it had been there somewhere. There is a piece down in our hot gallery at the moment that was also left in the back that was being, which is a piece by Chambers, which we conserved. So that project was all about conserving the work and making sure some of the works are on show in kind of exhibition. We have we don't have a permanent room, but we integrate them into exhibitions. We have some of them in the hot gallery at the moment, which will be permanent today. And we're working towards that.
We will be having, the next session is going to be around institutions, okay? So we can kind of bring that into that session, okay? Carol, if you don't mind, we'll just round off here. Just last thing I'll say, just really quickly, is I think what's emerged from this, following Candice's intervention and the other interventions, is that we need to take care of the work that we produce. We can't rely on institutions. We need to interrogate. We need to have those intergenerational conversations. We need to show love to and value what we produce, so that it's not destroyed or left to the institutions to do what they want. So I'm really encouraged by this conversation, and thank you, all the panel, for your contributions to this. Thank you.